voice messages from my missing best friend. The incessant buzzing of my phone pulled me from a deep sleep. Groggily, I reached for it, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness of my dorm room. It was 3:17 a.m., and Claire's name flashed across the display. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like her to call at this hour. "Claire?" I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. But it wasn't a call. It was a voice message. Claire's cheerful voice filled my ear, clear and excited despite the early hour. "Zoe. Oh my God, you won't believe this view. I know it's insanely early, but I just had to share this with you. The sunrise over these mountains is absolutely breathtaking. I wish you were here to see it." I couldn't help but smile, even as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. That was Claire for you, always chasing the next adventure, always wanting to share every moment of it with me. We'd been inseparable since our first day at Evergreen State University 3 years ago. Claire Pearson, with her wild curls and even wilder spirit, had burst into my carefully ordered world like a whirlwind, and I'd never been the same since. As I listened to Claire describe the vibrant colors painting the sky and the crisp mountain air filling her lungs, I felt a familiar pang of envy mixed with admiration. Claire had always been the brave one, the one who pushed boundaries and sought out new experiences. I was more comfortable with my feet firmly on the ground, but Claire soared. This solo hiking trip to the remote Cascade Mountains was just another example of her fearless nature. When she'd first told me about her plans, I'd been worried. "Are you sure it's safe?" I'd asked, concern etching my features. Claire had just laughed, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. "Oh, Zoe," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "That's why I love you. You always keep me grounded. But I need this. I need to prove to myself that I can do this alone." I understood, even if I didn't entirely agree. That was the foundation of our friendship, understanding and accepting each other, differences and all. As Claire's voice message continued, detailing her planned route for the day and the breathtaking scenery around her, I found myself drifting back to sleep, lulled by the familiar cadence of her voice. Before unconsciousness claimed me completely, I made a mental note to call her later that day to check in. The next few days passed in a blur of classes, study sessions, and more enthusiastic voice messages from Claire. Each one painted a vivid picture of her adventure, the challenging trails she conquered, the serene lakes she discovered, and the sense of freedom she felt in the wilderness. "I feel alive out here, Zoe," she said in one message, her voice filled with wonder. "It's like I'm finally breathing for the first time." I listened to each message multiple times, savoring the joy in Claire's voice and trying to imagine the spectacular scenes she described. Part of me wished I had the courage to join her on such an adventure, while another part was content to experience it vicariously through her enthusiastic recountings. On the 4th day of her trip, I received a particularly excited message from Claire. "Zoe, I found the most amazing spot. It's this hidden valley, surrounded by towering peaks. The wildflowers here. I've never seen anything like it. I'm going to stay here an extra day to explore. Don't worry if you don't hear from me, the signal's pretty weak out here." I felt a slight twinge of unease at the thought of Claire going even further off the grid, but I pushed it aside. This was Claire, after all. She was capable, prepared, and smart. She'd been planning this trip for months, meticulously mapping out her route and packing all the necessary gear. Still, as I fell asleep that night, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just my usual worrying. Claire was fine. She was living her dream, experiencing the adventure of a lifetime. Little did I know, that message would be the last time I heard Claire's voice untainted by fear. The last time her words would be filled with pure, unadulterated joy. The last time things would be normal between us. As I drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that my world was about to be turned upside down, that the bond between Claire and me would be tested in ways I could never have imagined. I didn't know that the voice messages, which had been a source of vicarious excitement, were about to become something far more sinister. The adventure was only beginning, and it was about to take a dark, unexpected turn. As I lay in bed, Claire's excited voice still echoing in my mind, I found myself reflecting on our friendship. We'd met during freshman orientation, two lost souls in a sea of unfamiliar faces. I remember how Claire's vibrant red hair had caught my eye first, followed by her infectious laugh. She'd been telling an animated story to a group of wide-eyed newcomers, her hands gesticulating wildly. And that's why you should never try to outrun a campus security golf cart, she'd concluded with a wink, causing the group to burst into laughter. I'd been drawn to her like a moth to a flame, captivated by her easy confidence and warm smile. When our eyes met, she'd waved me over, pulling me into the circle as if we'd known each other for years. From that moment on, we were inseparable. Claire and Zoe, Zoe and Claire. The adventurer and the planner. The dreamer and the realist. We balanced each other perfectly. Our dorm room became a testament to our contrasting personalities. My side was neat and organized, with color-coded study schedules pinned to a corkboard. Claire's side was a creative chaos of travel posters, half-finished art projects, and dog-eared travel guides. I smiled at the memory of our first big argument, halfway through freshman year. Claire had decided on a whim to road trip to the coast for the weekend, just days before our midterms. "Come on, Zoe," she'd pleaded, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. "We need to live a little. The ocean is calling." I'd stood my ground, gesturing at my meticulously prepared study materials. "Claire, we can't just take off like that. We have responsibilities, exams to prepare for." In the end, we'd compromised. We studied hard for 2 days, then took a day trip to the coast, returning exhausted but happy, with sand in our shoes and the taste of salt on our lips. It was the first of many adventures Claire would drag me on, each one pushing me a little further out of my comfort zone. As the years passed, I watched Claire's wanderlust grow. She'd spend hours poring over maps, planning imaginary expeditions to far-flung corners of the world. I'd listen to her dreams, half envious of her courage, half terrified of the risks she was willing to take. When she first mentioned the solo hiking trip to the Cascades, I'd felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. "Alone?" I'd asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "Wouldn't it be safer to go with a group?" Claire had just smiled, that soft, understanding smile she reserved for moments when she thought I was being overly cautious. "I need to do this, Zoe. I need to prove to myself that I can." I'd helped her plan, of course. It was what I did best. Together, we'd pored over topographical maps, researched the best gear, and created detailed itineraries. I'd even insisted on buying her a high-end satellite phone, just in case, I'd said, and Claire had hugged me tightly, recognizing the gesture for what it was, my way of supporting her even when I was scared. The day she left, I'd hugged her so hard I thought my arms would break. "Be careful," I'd whispered, fighting back tears. "Always," she replied with a grin, hefting her enormous backpack. "Don't worry so much, Zoe. I'll be back before you know it, with enough stories to last us until graduation." Now, lying in my bed, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the dorm, I felt Claire's absence keenly. The room seemed too quiet, too still without her bubbly presence. I glanced at her empty bed, neatly made for once, and felt a pang of loneliness. I reached for my phone again, scrolling through Claire's recent messages. Her voice, filled with awe and excitement, spilled from the speaker. "Day 2, and I've already seen 3 bears. Don't worry, I kept my distance. But oh, Zoe, they were magnificent. I wish you could see this. I found this amazing hot spring today. The water was so clear, and so warm. It's like nature's own bathtub. The stars out here, Zoe. I've never seen anything like it. It's like the whole universe is spread out above me. I feel so small, but in the best way possible." Each message was a window into Claire's adventure, and I found myself hanging on every word, trying to picture the scenes she described. Part of me wished I had the courage to be out there with her, experiencing it all firsthand. But a larger part was content to be here, safe in our familiar room, experiencing it all through Claire's eyes. As I drifted off to sleep, Claire's latest message played in my mind. The excitement in her voice, the promise of that hidden valley. I pushed away the nagging worry, focusing instead on how happy she sounded. Claire was living her dream, and I was happy for her. Truly, I was. But as sleep finally claimed me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. That this adventure, like so many before it, would push us both in ways we never expected. Little did I know how right that feeling would turn out to be. The first sign that something was amiss came 5 days into Claire's trip. I'd grown accustomed to waking up to her enthusiastic voice messages, each one painting vivid pictures of her adventures. But that morning, my phone remained stubbornly silent. I tried to quell the unease rising in my chest. "It's probably just poor reception," I muttered to myself, my fingers hovering over Claire's contact information. I hesitated, not wanting to seem overprotective. Claire had always teased me about my worrying nature. "You're like a mother hen, Zoe," she'd laugh, her green eyes twinkling. "I can take care of myself, you know." So I waited, trying to focus on my classes, on the mundane rhythm of college life. But my mind kept wandering to the mountains, imagining Claire trekking through dense forests and scaling rocky peaks. Was she safe? Was she happy? By the 3rd day of silence, the knot of anxiety in my stomach had grown into a leaden weight. I couldn't concentrate on my lectures, couldn't sleep without dreaming of Claire lost and alone in the wilderness. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I called her satellite phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey, Claire," I said, hating how my voice quavered. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while and, well, I'm probably being silly, but give me a call when you can, okay? Love you." I ended the call and stared at my phone, willing it to ring. It remained silent. That night, as I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on Claire's empty bed across the room, my phone suddenly buzzed. I nearly fell out of bed in my haste to grab it. "Claire?" I gasped. But the voice that came through the speaker was not the one I'd been longing to hear. It was Claire's voice, yes, but it was off. Flat. emotionless. "Hey Zoe," the message crackled, static distorting the words. "The weather's turned. Lots of rain. Might have to cut the trip short. I'll let you know." I played the message again. And again. Each time, the wrongness of it scraped against my nerves. Where was the enthusiasm, the vivid descriptions, the laugh in her voice? This didn't sound like Claire at all. As I scrutinized the message, I noticed something else, a background noise I couldn't quite place. It was faint, almost lost in the static, but it sounded like scratching? My imagination conjured images of Claire, trapped and trying to claw her way out of somewhere. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the horrifying thought. Over the next few days, the messages continued, each one stranger than the last. Claire's voice grew increasingly detached, her words clipped and vague. The background noises became more pronounced, howling wind, strange echoes, and once, I could have sworn I heard a man's voice, low and angry, before Claire's voice cut in unnaturally cheerful. "Just talking to myself," she'd said, her tone jarringly bright. "You know how it is out here, all alone." But Claire had never talked to herself. And she'd certainly never sounded afraid of being alone. She thrived on solitude, drew strength from it. This wasn't right. None of this was right. My attempts to call her back went unanswered. Texts remained unread. With each passing hour, my anxiety ratcheted up another notch. I couldn't focus on my studies, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My roommates started giving me worried looks, whispering among themselves when they thought I couldn't hear. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to call Claire's parents. My hands shook as I dialed the number, rehearsing what I would say. How could I explain my fears without sounding paranoid? The call went to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Pearson. It's Zoe. I'm a little worried about Claire. Have you heard from her recently? Could you give me a call back when you can? Thanks." Hours passed. No return call. I tried again the next day, and the next. Nothing. It was unlike them not to respond, especially when it concerned their daughter. The silence from Claire's family only amplified my growing sense of dread. As a last resort, I contacted the local authorities in the area where Claire was hiking. I paced our small dorm room as the phone rang, rehearsing what I would say, determined to make them understand the gravity of the situation. The dispatcher who answered listened patiently, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "We get calls like this all the time, miss," he said, his tone kind but dismissive. "Hikers often go out of contact for days. The mountains can play tricks on cell signals." "But you don't understand," I insisted, my free hand clenching into a fist. "This isn't like Claire. Her messages, they're wrong. Something's happened to her, I know it." He sighed, and I could almost see him shaking his head. "I understand you're worried, but we can't send out search parties every time a hiker's phone dies. Tell you what, we'll keep an eye out and let you know if we hear anything. In the meantime, try not to worry too much. These things have a way of working themselves out." I hung up, feeling helpless and frustrated. Didn't they understand? This wasn't just a case of a hiker going off-grid. Something was wrong with Claire, I could feel it in my bones. To make matters worse, the weather took a turn for the worse. a severe storm system moved into the area where Claire was hiking. I sat glued to the local news channel, watching footage of swollen rivers, mudslides, and rescue helicopters grounded due to high winds. Any hope of an immediate search was dashed by Mother Nature herself. As the days wore on, I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't concentrate on my classes, couldn't engage in conversations with friends. My world had narrowed to the space between Claire's last known location and the silent phone in my hand. I started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams where I could hear Claire calling for help, but I couldn't find her. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, reaching for a friend who wasn't there. My roommates tried to help. They brought me food, offered to take notes for me in class, tried to distract me with movies and games. But their kindness only underscored the Claire-shaped hole in my life. It should have been Claire comforting me, Claire making me laugh, Claire assuring me that everything would be okay. As I sat in our dorm room one evening, staring at Claire's empty bed, her last normal message played on repeat in my mind. The excitement in her voice as she described the hidden valley, the promise of adventure. How quickly it had all turned sour. My phone buzzed, and I lunged for it, heart in my throat. But it wasn't Claire. It was a news alert: search and rescue operations delayed in Cascade Mountains due to severe weather. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Claire was out there, somewhere in that storm, and there was nothing I could do about it. The cheery voice messages that had once been a source of excitement now haunted me, a reminder of how quickly things could change. As night fell, bringing with it a fresh barrage of rain against my window, I made a decision. If no one else was going to take Claire's disappearance seriously, then I would have to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't sit here any longer, waiting for news, imagining worst-case scenarios. I pulled out my laptop and began researching. Topographical maps of the area, weather reports, missing persons procedures, I absorbed it all with a desperate intensity. I created a timeline of Claire's messages, noting every inconsistency, every strange background noise. I was going to find out what happened to my best friend, no matter what it took. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I looked up from my laptop, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. I had a plan. It was risky, possibly foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't act soon, it might be too late. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start my own investigation. Because something was very, very wrong, and I was determined to find out what. Little did I know, this decision would plunge me into a nightmare that would push me to my limits and test the very foundations of my friendship with Claire. The adventure that had started with excited voice messages was about to become a desperate race against time, with stakes higher than I could have ever imagined. The shrill ring of my phone pierced the pre-dawn silence, jolting me from a fitful sleep. My heart raced as I fumbled for the device, squinting at the bright screen. Claire's name flashed, a sight that once brought joy but now filled me with dread. A voice message. With trembling fingers, I pressed play, bracing myself for what I might hear. The scream that erupted from the speaker was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was Claire's voice, but distorted by sheer terror and crackling static. "Zoe! Help me!" There, the message cut off abruptly, leaving me in stunned, horrified silence. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The scream echoed in my mind, a haunting testament to Claire's fear. What had happened? Who were they? The questions swirled in my head, each more terrifying than the last. Snapping out of my paralysis, I frantically tried to call Claire back. Once, twice, 3 times, each attempt met with the same robotic voice informing me that the number was unavailable. My hands shook as I left a voicemail, my own voice cracking with emotion. Claire. Claire, what's happening? Where are you? Please, please call me back. I'm going to get help, I promise. Sleep was now impossible. I paced our small dorm room, my bare feet padding softly on the cold floor. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Had she been attacked by an animal? Fallen off a cliff? Or was it something even worse? Had someone found her out there, alone and vulnerable? As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the window, my phone chimed again. Another voice message from Claire. I steeled myself before playing it, dreading what I might hear. Hey Zoe, Claire's voice came through, unnaturally calm after the earlier scream. Sorry about that last message. I thought I saw something in the woods. False alarm. Everything's fine now. Don't worry about me, okay? I stared at my phone in disbelief, a cold feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. The disconnect between the terrified scream and this nonchalant message was jarring. Moreover, Claire's voice sounded off. The cadence was wrong, the tone flat. It was as if someone was trying to imitate Claire but couldn't quite get it right. I played the 2 messages back to back, the contrast making me feel sick. How could someone go from screaming in terror to calm reassurance in the span of a few hours? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Over the next few days, the messages continued, each one stranger than the last. Claire's voice became increasingly distorted, sometimes pitching low, sometimes unnaturally high. The content of the messages grew bizarre, with Claire describing scenes that seemed impossible. Zoe, you wouldn't believe the beach here, one message said, Claire's voice sounding distant and echoey. The sand is so white, and the water is crystal clear. I can see tropical fish swimming around my feet. I frowned, confusion and fear battling inside me. Beach? Tropical fish? Claire was supposed to be in the Cascade Mountains, not some tropical paradise. Was she delirious? Had she somehow been moved? Or was something even more sinister at play? Another message came in, this one even more disturbing. I met the most interesting person today, Claire's voice said, a strange lilt to her words. He says he knows you, Zoe. Says you two go way back. Isn't that funny? I don't remember you ever mentioning him. My blood ran cold. I didn't know anyone in the area where Claire was hiking. Who was this person claiming to know me? And why did Claire sound so detached when talking about it? As the messages piled up, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The Claire in these messages was a stranger, her voice familiar but her words and tone alien. I couldn't reconcile this with the vibrant, adventurous friend I knew. Desperate for some connection to the real Claire, I turned to her social media accounts. What I found there only deepened the mystery. To my shock, the accounts were still being updated. New photos appeared daily, showing Claire smiling in various scenic locations. But something was off about these images too. I scrutinized each new post, my journalist instincts kicking in. The lighting in the photos was strange, the backgrounds often blurry or indistinct. In some, Claire's smile seemed forced, her eyes holding a hint of fear that most might miss, but that I, knowing her as well as I did, couldn't help but notice. One photo in particular caught my attention. It showed Claire standing in front of a waterfall, her arms spread wide as if embracing the scene. But the waterfall looked wrong. The water didn't quite move right, and the rocks seemed to blur into each other at the edges. Most tellingly, Claire's hair was perfectly still, despite the fact that a waterfall of that size should have created significant mist and wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that these posts were a smokescreen, designed to make it seem like everything was normal. But who would do this? And why? The questions piled up, each one adding to the weight of fear and confusion pressing down on me. As I sat there, staring at my phone and the seemingly endless stream of incongruous messages and posts, I felt more alone than I ever had before. The Claire I knew, my best friend, the person who understood me better than anyone else in the world, was gone. In her place was this strange, distorted version that I couldn't understand or reach. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Claire was in trouble. Real, serious trouble. And somehow, for some reason, someone was going to great lengths to hide that fact. The thought of Claire out there, scared and alone, or worse, not alone but with someone who meant her harm, while these fake messages and posts tried to convince the world that everything was fine, made me feel sick with fear and anger. I knew then that I couldn't handle this on my own. I needed help, someone with skills I didn't have, someone who could make sense of the technical aspects of what was happening. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I made a decision. I would seek out Lucas Brennan, a computer science major known for his tech wizardry. If anyone could help me unravel this digital mystery, it would be him. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone to call Lucas. As I did, another message from Claire came through. I stared at the notification, my finger hovering over it, both dreading and needing to hear what it said. Whatever was going on, whoever was behind this, I silently vowed to Claire that I would figure it out. I would find her, no matter what it took. Little did I know, the rabbit hole I was about to dive into would be deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. The computer lab's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I hunched over the keyboard, my eyes burning from hours of staring at the screen. Lucas sat beside me, his presence both comforting and a reminder of the gravity of our task. We weren't just analyzing data, we were searching for Claire, my best friend, who had vanished into thin air. I pulled up the audio files of Claire's messages, my stomach clenching at the thought of hearing her distorted voice again. There has to be something we're missing, I muttered, more to myself than to Lucas. I'd listened to these messages countless times, but now, armed with new knowledge and desperation, I was determined to uncover their secrets. As I manipulated the audio, isolating different frequencies and background noises, a pattern began to emerge. Faint, but unmistakable. A rhythmic sound, almost mechanical in nature. My heart raced as I enhanced the audio, the sound becoming clearer with each adjustment. Lucas, listen to this, I said, my voice tight with excitement and fear. The steady thrum filled the lab, a beat that felt out of place in what should have been the ambient noise of a forest. What does that sound like to you? Lucas leaned in, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's industrial. Maybe some kind of generator or heavy machinery? The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. Claire wasn't lost in the wilderness. She was being held somewhere, likely against her will. The forest sounds in the background of her messages, they were fake, a carefully constructed audio backdrop to maintain the illusion that she was still on her hiking trip. As this realization sank in, my mind raced through possible scenarios. Was Claire being held in some remote facility? Had she stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see, a secret operation hidden in the mountains? The more I thought about it, the more terrifying the possibilities became. We need to cross-reference this sound with industrial sites near Claire's hiking route, I said, already pulling up maps on another screen. My fingers flew over the keyboard, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and fear. Every second counted. Who knew what Claire was enduring while we sat here, piecing together clues? As we delved deeper into our investigation, the scale of the deception became clear. The altered voice messages, the manipulated social media posts, this wasn't the work of a single person. This was an organized operation with significant resources. "Zoe," Lucas said, his voice low and serious, "whoever has Claire, they're dangerous. And they're watching. You need to be careful." His words sent a chill down my spine, but they also steeled my resolve. I was scared, yes, but more than that, I was angry. Angry at whoever had taken Claire, angry at the authorities who had dismissed my concerns, angry at myself for not realizing sooner that something was terribly wrong. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the lab, we had compiled a dossier of evidence, the isolated audio, a map of potential locations based on the background noise, a timeline of Claire's genuine messages versus the altered ones. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me as I left the lab, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. Every passing car, every early morning jogger suddenly seemed suspicious. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, paranoia seeping into every pore. Back in my dorm room, I sat on my bed, staring at Claire's empty one. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of her absence. I pulled out my notebook, my hands shaking slightly as I began to plan my next moves. Going to the police seemed like the logical step, but doubt gnawed at me. What if they were somehow involved? What if alerting the authorities put Claire in even more danger? The weight of the decision pressed down on me, every choice feeling monumental. As I scribbled down ideas and possible leads, a steely determination took hold. I would find Claire, no matter the cost. If that meant diving headfirst into danger, confronting whoever was behind this, then so be it. Claire would do the same for me in a heartbeat. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty and peril, but I was ready to face it. I had to be. Because somewhere out there, Claire was waiting, possibly hurt, definitely scared, and I was her only hope. The thought of her alone and in danger fueled a fire within me, burning away the last vestiges of fear and doubt. As I finalized my plans, a grim smile played on my lips. Whoever had taken Claire had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they had covered their tracks, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the lengths I would go to for my best friend. The hunt was on, and I wouldn't rest until I uncovered the truth and brought Claire home. The police station loomed before me, its brick facade suddenly intimidating. My heart pounded as I clutched the folder containing our findings, each step forward a battle against my growing paranoia. The weight of the evidence felt like lead in my hands, a burden of knowledge I both dreaded and needed to share. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across tired faces. The desk sergeant regarded me with weary eyes as I stumbled through my explanation, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. With each passing moment, his expression shifted from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. "Miss, we understand you're worried about your friend, but..." The dismissal in his tone ignited a fire within me. My voice steadied, fueled by a mixture of desperation and rage. I laid out our evidence methodically: the altered voice messages, the manipulated photos, the industrial sounds hidden in the background. Each piece of the puzzle I presented chipped away at his doubt, replacing it with a growing unease. As I finished, silence fell over the station. The sergeant's face had paled, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by a grim understanding of the situation's gravity. He disappeared into a back office, leaving me alone with my thundering heartbeat and the suffocating fear that I had just made a terrible mistake. Minutes stretched into an eternity before he returned, accompanied by a stern-faced detective. Detective Garrett, as he introduced himself, led me to a small, windowless room. The interrogation that followed was intense, each question peeling back layers of the mystery we had uncovered. As I recounted every detail, every suspicion, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, evaluated. Garrett's piercing gaze seemed to look through me, searching for something beyond my words. Was he trying to help, or was he part of whatever sinister force had taken Claire? Hours passed in that cramped room, my initial determination giving way to exhaustion and doubt. Had I done the right thing coming here? Would this actually help Claire, or had I just put her in more danger? When I finally emerged from the station, the world felt altered. The sun had set, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with grasping fingers. Every passing car, every stranger on the street became a potential threat. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, threatening to crush my resolve. Back in my dorm room, I paced restlessly, unable to shake the feeling that time was running out. The police had promised to investigate, to take our findings seriously, but would it be enough? Would they move fast enough to save Claire? As night deepened, a chilling realization settled over me: I couldn't rely solely on the authorities. Whether they were incompetent, overwhelmed, or somehow compromised, waiting for them to act felt like betraying Claire. With trembling hands, I pulled out my laptop and began to plan. Maps of the area, hiking trails, and potential industrial sites filled my screen. I cross-referenced them with the clues we had uncovered, my mind racing through possibilities and scenarios. Sleep eluded me as I prepared, gathering supplies and poring over every scrap of information we had. The risks were enormous. I was no trained investigator, no action hero. Just a college student way out of her depth. But I was also Claire's best friend, perhaps her only hope. As dawn broke, I shouldered my packed bag, my decision made. The face that looked back at me from the mirror was a stranger, determined, fierce, with a glint of desperation in her eyes. I left a vague note for my roommates and slipped out into the early morning light. The campus was quiet as I made my way towards the bus station, each step taking me further from the safety of my familiar world and deeper into the unknown. Fear and doubt gnawed at me, but underneath it all was a steely resolve. I would find Claire, no matter the cost. As I boarded the bus that would take me to the edge of the wilderness where Claire had disappeared, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move. But there was no turning back now. The bus pulled away from the curb, carrying me towards a confrontation with forces I barely understood. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever sinister plot we had stumbled upon, I was committed now. Claire was out there, somewhere, counting on me. And I wouldn't let her down. As the familiar landmarks of my college town faded into the distance, replaced by the looming shadows of distant mountains, I steeled myself for what was to come. The real journey, I realized, was just beginning. And its end, whether in triumph or tragedy, would change everything. The ancient bus whizzed to a stop at the edge of Pinecrest, a town so small it barely deserved the name. As I stepped off, the crisp mountain air filled my lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else. A tension and unease that seemed to permeate everything. I adjusted my heavy backpack, feeling the weight of my mission settle onto my shoulders along with the straps. Every face that turned towards me sent a shiver down my spine. Curious locals, or something more sinister? I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, catalogued, assessed. The paranoia that had been my constant companion since Claire's disappearance whispered that any of these people could be involved, could be the reason my best friend was missing. I set off towards the trailhead where Claire had last been seen, each step taking me further from civilization and deeper into uncertainty. The forest closed in around me, the dense canopy overhead casting everything in a greenish gloom. As I hiked, I replayed Claire's last normal message in my mind for the 1000th time. "Zoe, you wouldn't believe how beautiful it is up here," her voice echoed in my memory, full of wonder and excitement. "The air is so clean, and the views. God, I wish you could see this." The discord between her cheerful voice and the oppressive silence of the forest around me was jarring. How could she have vanished so completely in this wilderness? The question haunted me with every step. Hours into my trek, my muscles aching and doubt beginning to creep in, I encountered another hiker. He was a weathered man with piercing blue eyes and a too-wide smile that never quite reached those eyes. He introduced himself as Miles Everett, a local guide. "Not too many solo hikers out this way," he said, his gaze lingering on me a beat too long. "Especially not pretty young things like yourself. What brings you to our neck of the woods?" I hesitated, weighing my options. How much should I reveal? In the end, I decided on a half-truth. "I'm looking for my friend," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "She was hiking out here a couple weeks ago and, well, I haven't heard from her since." Something flickered in Miles' eyes. Recognition? Concern? Or was it something darker? It was gone before I could be sure, replaced by that too-wide smile. "Well now, that is concerning," he said, his tone sympathetic but somehow off. "Tell you what, there's an old cabin not far from here where hikers sometimes hole up if the weather turns. Why don't I show you? Might be your friend left some sign there." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to turn and run back the way I'd come. But the possibility of finding a clue, any clue, about Claire's whereabouts overrode my caution. I nodded, and we set off together, the forest somehow seeming darker and more menacing than before. As we walked, Miles peppered me with questions. Where was I from? How long had I known Claire? Had I told anyone else about my search? I answered carefully, watching his reactions, feeding him just enough information to keep him talking while revealing as little as possible. The cabin, when we reached it, was a dilapidated structure that looked long abandoned. Rotting boards sagged, and the windows were dark, empty eyes staring out at the forest. Miles pushed open the creaking door, and I followed him inside, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he must hear it. And then I saw it. There, on a dusty table, lay a familiar bracelet, a delicate chain with a small silver bird charm. I'd given it to Claire on her 18th birthday. My gasp must have given me away because in that instant, Miles' demeanor changed completely. The friendly mask dropped, replaced by something cold and calculating. He lunged for me, but years of self-defense classes kicked in. I ducked under his grasp, driving my elbow into his solar plexus. As he doubled over, Wheezing, I bolted for the door. I ran blindly into the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Miles' enraged shouts echoed behind me, spurring me to push harder, run faster. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes or hours, time lost all meaning in the green blur of the forest. When I finally stopped, gasping for air, the woods around me were completely unfamiliar. I was lost, but at least I had escaped. Or so I thought. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold, the full weight of my situation settled over me. I was alone in an unfamiliar forest, being hunted by at least one person who meant me harm, and no closer to finding Claire. The magnitude of my mistake in coming here alone hit me like a physical blow. I huddled in the hollow of a large tree, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. The forest at night was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Each noise made me flinch, imagining Miles or his associates closing in. It was then that I heard it, Claire's voice, distant but unmistakable, calling my name. My heart leapt, hope warring with suspicion. How could she be here? Against every instinct screaming at me to stay hidden, I moved towards the voice. As I got closer, hope turned to horror as I realized the truth. It wasn't Claire at all. The voice was a recording, played on a loop, distorted but clearly designed to lure me in. I crouched behind a fallen log, watching as shadowy figures moved through the trees, flashlights sweeping the forest floor. They were searching for me, using Claire's voice as bait. The pieces started to fall into place, the altered messages, the faked social media posts, all part of an elaborate trap. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. Whatever she had stumbled upon, whatever had led to her disappearance, it was big enough that they were willing to go to extreme lengths to cover it up. As I lay there, barely daring to breathe, a new sound cut through the night, the rhythmic thrum we'd isolated from Claire's messages. It was distant but growing louder. Whatever facility it was coming from, I was getting closer to it. Closer to Claire. With renewed determination, I began to formulate a plan. I couldn't take on this organization alone, but maybe I could find Claire, get concrete evidence of what was happening here. As the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, I set off towards the sound, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. I moved cautiously through the forest, every sense on high alert. The rhythmic sound grew louder, guiding me like a beacon. After what felt like hours, I caught a glimpse of something through the trees, a high fence topped with barbed wire, incongruous in the middle of the wilderness. Keeping low and using the underbrush for cover, I approached the fence. Beyond it, I could see a cluster of nondescript buildings. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their presence confirming that whatever was happening here was far from legal. As I watched, trying to formulate a plan, a truck approached the gate. In that moment, I made a split-second decision that would change everything. As the gate opened to admit the truck, I sprinted from my hiding place and managed to slip inside just before it closed. Heart pounding, I ducked behind some crates, praying I hadn't been seen. And then I heard it, Claire's voice, real this time, coming from one of the buildings. She was here. She was alive. But as relief flooded through me, I realized the true scale of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about a missing hiker. This was something much bigger, much more dangerous. And now I was in the heart of it. As I crouched there, formulating a desperate plan to reach Claire and somehow get us both out of here, I knew that the Real challenge was only just beginning. Whatever happened next would determine not just our fate, but potentially uncover a conspiracy bigger than anything I could have imagined. The truth was within reach, but so was more danger than I'd ever faced. And as I steeled myself for what was to come, I couldn't help but wonder, had I just made the biggest mistake of my life, or was I on the verge of uncovering something that would change everything? The facility's harsh floodlights cut through the darkness as I crouched behind a stack of crates, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would give me away. Claire's voice, raw and terrified, echoed from a nearby building. Every instinct screamed at me to run to her, but years of friendship had taught me to think before acting. One wrong move now could doom us both. Inching forward, I surveyed the compound. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces hidden behind masks that made them seem more machine than human. The buildings, nondescript and windowless, gave no hint of the horrors they might contain. As I watched, a door swung open, and two men emerged dragging a figure between them. Claire. The sight of her, battered and barely conscious, ignited something primal within me. Caution evaporated, replaced by a surge of protective fury. I sprang from my hiding place, the element of surprise my only advantage. The guard nearest to me went down hard, caught off guard by my sudden appearance. Claire, seizing the moment, drove her elbow into her captor's stomach with a strength born of desperation. What followed was a chaotic blur of action and fear. Alarms blared, harsh and insistent. Shouts filled the air, a cacophony of anger and confusion. Claire's hand found mine, her grip painfully tight, as we ran. The compound became a nightmarish maze, every turn bringing new dangers. Guards seemed to materialize from the shadows, their weapons glinting in the harsh light. The perimeter fence loomed before us, a final barrier between captivity and freedom. We scrambled over, the barbed wire tearing at our clothes and skin. A shot rang out, the bullet so close I felt its heat as it whizzed past. We tumbled to the other side, the impact driving the air from my lungs. But there was no time to recover. We plunged into the forest, the sounds of pursuit nipping at our heels. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsing in a hidden hollow as the first light of dawn painted the sky. Claire shook violently, whether from cold, fear, or both, I couldn't tell. I held her close, my own body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and the crushing realization of what we'd just escaped. As the immediate danger passed, the full weight of our situation settled over us. We were lost in the wilderness, pursued by a powerful and ruthless organization, with no resources and no way to call for help. The odds seemed insurmountable, but giving up wasn't an option. We had come too far, risked too much, to surrender now. The days that followed tested us in ways we had never imagined. We foraged for food, our stomachs churning with hunger and anxiety. We drank from streams, each sip a gamble with waterborne illnesses. Sleep came in fitful bursts, always alert for the sound of pursuit. The forest, once a place of adventure for Claire, now seemed a green prison, full of hidden dangers and false paths. As we struggled to survive, Claire slowly revealed what she had uncovered. The facility was part of a vast network involved in human trafficking, illegal experiments, and high-level corruption. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, reaching into governments, law enforcement, and multinational corporations. Understanding dawned that our escape hadn't just been about saving Claire, we now carried information that could bring down an empire of crime. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled into a small town, our appearance causing a stir among the locals. The sheriff, initially skeptical of our wild tale, changed his tune when we mentioned one name, Detective Owen Garrett. Within hours, Garrett arrived, his face a mix of relief and grim determination. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. We were whisked away to a safe house, our story pouring out in a torrent of words and tears. Garrett listened, his expression growing darker with each revelation. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore, it was potentially the biggest criminal investigation of the century. The next weeks passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and psychological evaluations. We recounted our stories countless times, each retelling bringing fresh waves of trauma and relief. Slowly, a picture emerged of a criminal empire that had operated in the shadows for decades, its tendrils reaching into every level of society. As the investigation progressed, the media caught wind of the story. Our names and faces were suddenly everywhere, our ordeal dissected and analyzed by talking heads who couldn't possibly understand what we'd been through. The attention was overwhelming, turning a private trauma into a public spectacle. The pressure began to take its toll. Nightmares plagued us both, vivid recreations of our captivity and escape. Crowded places became overwhelming, loud noises sent us into panic. The world that had once seemed full of adventure now felt fraught with hidden dangers. We clung to each other, our shared experience creating a bond that no one else could understand. Months passed, and slowly, painfully, we began to heal. Therapy helped, as did the unwavering support of our families and friends. We returned to college, trying to reclaim some semblance of our old lives. But we were irrevocably changed. The carefree students we had once been were gone, replaced by more cautious, haunted versions of ourselves. As the criminal case progressed, we were called upon to testify. Facing our captors in court was one of the hardest things we'd ever done, but also one of the most empowering. Seeing them brought to justice, watching as the empire they had built crumbled under the weight of evidence, brought a sense of closure we hadn't realized we needed. The aftermath of the trial brought new challenges. We were hailed as heroes, our faces plastered across magazine covers, our story optioned for books and movies. The attention was disorienting, a stark contrast to the isolation we had felt during our ordeal. We struggled to reconcile our public image with our private struggles, the ongoing battle with PTSD and anxiety that the cameras didn't see. Through it all, Claire and I leaned on each other. Our friendship, already strong before, had been forged into something unbreakable by our shared trauma. We understood each other in ways no one else could, the unspoken communication of survivors who had been through hell together. As the years passed, we slowly rebuilt our lives. Claire, once driven by a thirst for adventure, channeled her experiences into advocacy work, becoming a powerful voice for victims of trafficking. I found myself drawn to investigative journalism, determined to shine a light on the dark corners of society that most people never see. On the 5th anniversary of our escape, we met in our old dorm room, now preserved as a sort of unofficial memorial. The familiar surroundings brought a flood of memories, both good and bad. We talked for hours, reflecting on how far we'd come and the scars we still carried. As night fell, my phone buzzed with a new notification. A voice message from Claire. We exchanged confused looks. She was right here, so how could she be calling? With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Claire's voice, cheerful and light, filled the air. "Hey Zoe. Just checking in. Can't wait to see you soon." The message continued, describing plans and adventures that had never happened. A chill ran down my spine as I looked up at Claire, seeing the same horror I felt reflected in her eyes. The implications hung heavy in the air between us. It wasn't over. Whatever we'd escaped, whoever was behind it all, they were still out there. And they were letting us know that they hadn't forgotten about us. As the message ended, Claire and I exchanged a look of grim determination. We had survived once. We had exposed a dangerous conspiracy and brought down a criminal empire. And if we had to, we would do it all again. The adventure that had started with excited voice messages had changed us forever. It had shown us the darkest depths of human cruelty, but also the incredible strength of the human spirit. It had tested our friendship and proven it unbreakable. Whatever came next, we would face it together. As we left the dorm room, stepping out into the cool night air, we were no longer the carefree students we had once been. We were survivors, fighters, and whatever darkness still lurked out there, we were ready for it. The end of one chapter, perhaps, but the beginning of another. Our story, we realized, was far from over.